let's hope the power stays on for everybody, right?
Right.
It's 4:02. I'm going to call the meeting to order and with a note that Frank has not joined us yet, and we will say hello when he does. First item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the September 18th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. Hopefully everyone's read the minutes, and if there are any additions, subtractions, corrections, spelling errors, grammar problems, now's the time to fix them. Go ahead, Bert, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was present there, so should just add me to the roll call of that meeting.
Okay, thank you. We overlooked you. I'm so sorry.
We just didn't want to spell your name wrong, so.
Good.
Okay, so Lee was the only one who was absent. Frank was here. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm going to suggest that we add Bert and then a semicolon so that it looks like Lee has an excused absence only and not the rest of the group. Any other corrections?
Karen, really quick, I believe Frank was excused on that one too. He had sent in a last minute email stating he wasn't going to make it.
Okay, great.
Oh, that's right. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. So let me put my Bert in another place. Okay, anything else? Any others? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as corrected.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Phil. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Lee, was that a yes from you?
I can't vote because I wasn't there.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Okay, we got a quorum.
And Karen, Frank is here now.
Okay. We'll see him in a minute, I imagine.
Hi.
Okay. Hi, Frank. We just approved the minutes from the previous meeting. That's all the farther we've gotten today.
I just caught that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Audience participation. Is there anybody would like to speak up about an issue that's not on the agenda?
And I do not have any hands raised at this time.
Okay. About how many people do we have today, Scott?
Including Planning Commission staff, there's 18 people.
18. Great. That's good news. Okay. First item on our discussion agenda is the Parks and Open Space. And let me turn that over to Layla or Scott F, or whichever one of you wants to take it on.
I'll take it, and Scott can chime in as needed. I'm going to share my screen. And I think too, just to clarify, so do you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Make sure. Okay. Sorry, I need to get my screen oriented here. That we're actually, we think you as a body are talking about open space, sort of left parks off.
Okay.
This discussion, but thanks, Karen. I think we've been talking about it that way, but just to clarify that we're actually just focusing on the definition of open space. So just to recap, we started, so it's just recapping kind of where we got to up to last meeting and then after, but we had feedback from the several commissioners. We reviewed those in August. We reviewed definitions from other cities as good examples. We reviewed all those comments, and we developed a proposed definition, which we discussed last month in September. And then Planning Commission discussed that proposed definition, provided additional commentary and feedback, which I reiterated back to the Planning Commission a couple times. I went back and reviewed it just to make sure I was on point. We're here today to continue that discussion. Just as a reminder, these were the good examples that folks had mentioned. So Gerhardt, Astoria, Tillamook, Lawrence, and Douglas County. The discussion and feedback kind of in summary from our last planning commission meeting is clarity in the definition to ensure that parking and parking related areas are excluded from the open space calculation. So there was a desire for additional clarity on that in the definition. That there should be a limitation of improved surfaces. So that would apply to pervious or impervious surfaces. So we had a passionate discussion about pickleball courts in that, and so endeavored to try to clarify that in the definition, and then the allowing of appropriate accessory structures. So that was also part of our discussion. I got a comment from one of our commissioners I thought was really helpful for me in terms of updating the definition, but the way to protect the character of the zone, in this case the SRR, is to require that open space a developer must set aside in return for greater density and development, that the area remains in or is close to its present in natural state. So I thought that was a helpful summation of that. So it was from Commissioner Chris. So this was the proposal we had discussed last time. And I went ahead, and so land area is not occupied by buildings, parking areas, or other paved surfaces, excluding walkways and trails, refers to land that is generally contiguous and may be devoted for the purpose of pleasure, recreation, ornament, light, and air, including the preservation of natural features for topography of the site, including protection of environmentally sensitive areas. So kind of taking into consideration these feedback items, I provide a red line strikeout version of that definition. So adding in, allowing for accepting accessory structures that enhance an area's natural state. So we won't allow buildings, but we will accept for accessory structures that allows for benches, maybe a gazebo or a fountain. Parking related surfaces as opposed to areas. So we can be clear that we're talking about driveways, drive aisles, anything kind of related to the parking area. And then constructed surfaces of any kind, to kind of exclude any potential sort of formal recreational areas that folks would be including in that calculation. So that's what I put forward. I just have a final quick slide here, which is there's consensus, as I understand it, to eliminate as a park or as a public or private park or area golf course, and that this would be adopted into section 1.030 as a definition. So that's what I've got based on our feedback from last month. So invite your discussion or questions, and happy to make any additional amendments if planning commission sees fit. So you can cogitate on it for a minute and I'll drink some tea.
I have a suggestion, and I see John's hand is raised, but if you don't mind, I'll go jump in. It's awkward to me to have the accessory structures you have an exception in the middle of the part, right at the beginning of the part that we're trying to list all the exclusions. So would it be okay to say land area that is not occupied by parking related surfaces or other constructed surfaces of any kind, excluding walkways and trails, and accepting accessory structures that enhance?
Oh,
does that make sense?
does completely. Yep.
Okay, and go ahead, John.
First of all, let me say that, Layla, I think you've captured pretty well what it sounded to me like we were all getting at last week or last month. Contiguous, let's see, refers to land generally contiguous. Quick question, is any landscaping in the middle of a park, in the middle of parking and landscape islands, things like that, is that intended to be, are we going to take all the parking area as contiguous and sort of exclude little pieces like that in the middle of it? That was my first question.
That's how I would read it. And based
Yeah.
on some of the feedback I got from commissioners, I believe that was the intent. So,
Okay.
and I welcome any thoughts from any of the commissioners, but that's how I
that was
interpret it.
my intent, and
It's an
I
island in the
wasn't sure how it
parking area.
got captured here, or if it got captured here.
Yeah.
The second question I had was as it pertains to the same increase in open space as it pertains to residential, but for multifamily, like we sort of started this with, and do we still want to have 50% of the 40% for use as cultural or social gathering places for people within the multifamily development? Was that our intent, and if so, are we going to try to say that anywhere, or do we kind of imply it already?
So I think this definition is just specific to open space, and then the 50% requirement for multifamily would be sort of an addition to it. So it's a separate requirement and definition in the code, or sorry, the ordinance. So I see them separate. I would interpret them as staff separately. But the thing to consider is that the things that are required for that 50% would actually be different than what's included in this definition. And so that's a question for the commission. I think that I will note that when we go through the residential code update, residential ordinance update, sorry, I say code, it's just a form of habit. My guess is we're going to have to look at that requirement then as well. But right now, I would say that if someone came in with a playground or a community space, that 50% of their 40% could be that, but the remainder would have to meet this definition. Scott, if you have any comments on that, but.
Well, the reason I brought it up is because I can see a conflict between, okay, we've defined what an open space is, and we can only go upgrade the density by doing this 40% with these conditions. But then if we want to do, if we want to take half of that and do however it's defined, I can't remember exactly how it's defined in the multifamily, but it could conflict with what we're trying to do here. And in other words, you could have, I don't know, possibly accessory buildings and that really kind of go against what we're trying to do here in terms of open space. And maybe that's what we want to do, and maybe it's not. We haven't had any discussion about it, but I just want to throw it out there. I think the definition that we're sort of coming up with really captures what we're all thinking in terms of the 40%, though. So I guess we'll cross the other bridge when we come to it.
Yeah, no, it is indeed a conflict because the type of structures that are allowed and even noted in the code, in the ordinance, are like a swimming pool, an indoor swimming pool. That would be explicitly included for this. So it's sort of, I think of it as additive, where you have the 40% definition. If you're multifamily, you get a bit more flexibility in half of that 40%. You're actually required to do something different in that 50% of the 40%. So it is a bit like they are a bit in conflict, but I kind of see it as an additive requirement. So, okay, 20% will have to meet this definition, and then the other 20% has to meet the definition of that's required in the multifamily. I think, again, I just, like you said, kind of crossing that bridge when we get there, I think makes sense.
I agree. I think ideally what's going to happen is when we do change the multifamily code, it'll refer to this definition of open space rather than having a different definition in that section of code of ordinance.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And I did some outreach. I talked to at least one developer about question about affordable housing came up. And it's less of an issue when you have a definition like this. It becomes more of an issue when you have a definition like that in our multifamily, because if you're requiring them to build or construct, it's a lot less expensive to do this kind of open space than it is to do constructed open space. And so I think that's a important conversation for the commission to have with respect to affordability, that those requirements may actually impose a financial burden on development that would not have otherwise included those kinds of facilities. So it's just something to think about. We're about to unwind that ball of yarn over the next year and a half. So it's hard not to think bigger. I get it.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Tom.
But I think you're muted, Tom.
4 years into the pandemic, you'd think I'd have figured that out. The first use of the word areas, I think that should be area apostrophe S. It's possessive, the area's natural state, referring to the natural state of the area.
Oh, okay. Yep, you're correct.
Then getting back to the topic John just brought up, I want to make sure I'm understanding the interplay of these definitions. So the one we're considering adopting requires 40%, the open space. The multifamily definition says at least 50% of the required open space is usable by the residents. Well, and then it gives examples of things which are usable, but that doesn't, the way I read that, and I want to make sure everyone else is reading it the same way, you don't have to create these structures, swimming pools, patios, desks. Those are usable, we're saying, but it can still be usable if it's left in an entirely natural state as contemplated by this definition.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay, so you're not saying, hey, you got to go out there and build a swimming pool or
no, and that's it. Thank you for clarifying that. That's exactly correct. And why, but because we say you can put a swimming pool in there, if someone came in with a proposal with that,
but
at this point,
as you pointed out,
right.
That's more expensive, and so it's not necessarily something anyone would do.
Right.
Okay.
And you as a commission can discuss and deliberate on whether or not you want to have those allowances in the future.
Okay. Yeah, I want to have that discussion at some point. I don't want to lose half the 40% to swimming pools.
Yeah, go ahead, Bert. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think, this is kind of a big picture discussion, definitely. And in many jurisdictions, the requirement for, quote, usable open space is specifically to take the pressure off the public need to develop parks and other things. And that the concept being that with usable open space, you're actually enhancing the livability of a particular development. Thereby, the city doesn't need to continually develop more parks, or at least not develop at the same rate. So my suggestion would be that, as part of this kind of big picture thing with the comprehensive plan and tuning of the land use ordinance, that there be a discussion about, that aspect. And, I don't think we need to sit right now, but it's important to recognize that the concept of usable is actually a pretty good one. And so we want to be thoughtful as we modify the code around these two subjects. I would agree. This seems pretty good. The only suggestion would be if there was something that said, or as amended by another section of the code, if that made it clear, or as amended by the multifamily section or something like that. But I don't think if we have a very large development 10 years from now or something, I think it's actually good that there's some usable open space with those kinds of projects.
It seems to me that the point of that multifamily housing description of taking half of the open space and making it usable, is that generally speaking, the residents won't have access to a yard to play in. So it makes sense to me to have some areas where a resident can go and, put their feet up and read a book for an hour outdoors, or, where kids can play, or people can have a picnic, picnic tables, or, something like that. Otherwise they would be doing that in their yards, and they won't have that availability. So that, to me, it's important that we do give that opportunity for the residents in multifamily to have some outdoor experience as part of their daily life. Are we at a point where this definition, as recently reconstructed by Layla in front of our very eyes, is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're doing at this point is we're not adding this definition to the zoning ordinance. What we're doing is directing staff to interpret the open space requirement where they find it in the zoning ordinance this way. Is that correct?
Yeah, so yeah, we can do it one of two ways. We can do that, and that's sort of the simplest way. If we want to do an ordinance amendment, we can also do that. It'd be sort of a housekeeping effort, but we will be updating the code over the next year and a half, so we can incorporate this into that update at that time. So that's what we were thinking, is that this gives us direction. You've had a robust conversation about it. You now know how to interpret meaning of open space. And then we can sort of tuck this into the code updates when we do them in a year and a half. If there's strong feelings against that, it's a lift for us to put it through an ordinance amendment process, but it's not one that we can't do. So,
John, I saw your hand go up.
Well, first of all, I'd like to sort of endorse Layla's. I think it was her fallback position, and that is, this becomes sort of a de facto definition for the next year or so, and we specifically include it when we rework some of the ordinances later, in a year, or, over the next year or so. Is that correct, Layla? Did I interpret that? Okay. And then this definition, basically the planning commission and the planning staff uses as the, I call it the de facto definition. It's more of an interim definition until we can specifically include it into the code. But I think that's the position I'd like to endorse.
Okay, Tom?
Yeah, I don't want to cause staff any extra work, but I'm wondering if there are people who won't know that we've endorsed this definition and just go looking through, the law on its face, and might be confused or misled to their detriment before they finally find out how we're interpreting it. I mean, is that an implausible risk that there's somebody planning some sort of development and don't know how we're going to construe this going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. And no, it's totally not implausible, but it's unlikely because everyone who would be proposing a PUD will need to do a pre-application with us. And we
Okay,
can provide that guidance to them at that time. The ones that we know of that are in the pipeline, I should say the one that we know of that's in the pipeline, have another that might be upcoming, are well aware of the discussion. So yeah, I don't want to, say that it's totally impossible. It's totally possible that could happen, but very unlikely would be my guess, just given also because we interact with every applicant. So we would make sure that, say they didn't have to do a pre-app and came to us. And Scott, I think that they have to do a pre-app for this. So they would be talking to us anyway already.
Multifamily project for sure.
Okay. Bert and Lee and Frank, I don't see your face, but I know you're listening. You want to weigh in on this? I'm looking at trying to achieve consensus. If not, then we'll have a vote. So go ahead, Frank.
I'm on board. I don't see anything that I would disagree with.
Okay. Bert?
Hey, looks good to me. Just need to everybody understands yards, which would be like yard, side yard, rear yard. Would it be included in this open space stuff? But yeah, I think this is a great improvement.
Okay. And Lee, how about you?
I like the way that this reads, thanks to a lot of work from a lot of people. So I think it's a useful tool for us in the future, the way that it is.
Okay. That sounds like consensus to me. Did I miss any? Tom, did you get to?
no, I'm fine with it, and I'm fine with just having this be direction to staff pending a formal adoption.
Okay. That sounds good to me. I think staff has their direction. Yay.
Good job,
one down.
everyone.
One down. Layla, I don't know if you or Scott want to talk about the item B on our agenda, changing the planning commission meeting days.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So we currently meet the third Monday of the month, and staff is proposing to change that meeting time to the second Monday of the month, so that we typically, at least since I've been here, and I think since the beginning of time, the Planning Commission has canceled its December meeting because there's been difficulty getting quorum and because maybe there haven't been active applications. We also run into problems every year with third Monday getting enough people to show up because of the Thanksgiving holiday. So that's one reason. The other is a sort of capacity reason, which is city council meetings fall the first Wednesday after the first Monday, and then the following Wednesday. And so staff meetings in a perpetual state of prep. So we don't have thoughts on that. If you're supportive, my suggestion would be someone make a motion and y'all take a formal vote, and then we will update the city calendar and then the annual calendar so that everyone's aware. And I would like it to start this November. So the meeting would be November 13th and December 11th.
I'll move that we change the regular meeting to the second Monday from the third.
Is there a second?
I'll second it. This is Frank.
Thank you, Frank. Is there any discussion by the commission? All in favor, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
That was a Frank aye, I heard. Okay, great. We have a new meeting date. And I have one additional thing that I would like to add to the agenda today. And that is we are getting really close to putting out an RFP for a consultant to help us with the comp plan update. And one of the things that staff has asked for is a liaison from the Planning Commission to work on an advisory committee to oversee the RFP process, the selection of a consultant, and to formulate the criteria for community members to also be on an advisory board to support this whole process and move it forward. We had 2 lovely commissioners offer their help, and I would like to nominate Bert to take on this responsibility to get us underway. Bert has a pretty heavy travel schedule, so I think about midway we may need to appoint another planning commissioner once we get this consultant on board and we have the advisory committee. Then we will have a permanent member on the advisory committee who will participate in all of the public hearings and help filter down the discussion and work with the staff and the consultants on making sure that the community's input has been heard and is addressed. And so I hope that's an okay way to do this, kind of do a split, and that the second person, once we get underway, would be John. I think he's got a real good pulse on what's happening in the community and would be invaluable to us once we start hearing from the public. And if that's okay with you guys, I would love to be able to make these appointments. John, I tried to get in touch with you, and unfortunately I don't have your phone number. I really wanted to talk to you about this before, so I hope you don't mind me just throwing you into the mix like that.
Not at all. Sure. I mean, do you have an idea of when the split's going to take place, or maybe we can talk about that offline if that's the case? I think it's a good question, and it wouldn't hurt for us to kind of hear what the timeline looks like, because it's going to affect all of us.
If I could jump in, these committees that for the comprehensive plans typically are between 14, 15, 16, 17 people. You usually want to keep them under 20, over 10, somewhere in there. And I don't think it would hurt to actually have both of you be on that committee, especially if there's going to be times where one or the other is going to miss. So having 2 liaisons from the Planning Commission probably wouldn't hurt. Oftentimes there's also one liaison from council, and then usually there's a method for selecting the other members of the committee at large that represent different groups, business groups, environmental groups, whatever they may be. But you want to get a broad selection of people that really represent the community. So,
yeah, and I'll just tag onto that a little bit. I was looking at a 20-member committee, more like a dozen maybe. And one of the things I'm working with City Council on, I was going to suggest in this instance, is that you have a primary member and an alternate. And the alternate would, because what we don't want to do in an advisory committee, right? And in the committee the size Scott's talking about, it would make sense to maybe have more than one member as a sort of seated member on that board. But I think for the size of our city, I was looking at more like a dozen at most, that you don't want to overwhelm the committee with decision makers. Like, your role is a bit not ancillary, but the real purpose of having an advisory group that's made up primarily of community members is that they're the folks sort of ground testing ideas. They see everything kind of first. They give us feedback so that by the time we bring it to you as a body, it's not only been through like kind of a larger public process, it's also been through this kind of smaller, more focused group of folks that are primarily not decision makers. And that to me gives kind of more of a pure empowerment to the community members. So if we have 4 out of 12 as elected or appointed officials, it starts to shift the balance of that if a third of the committee is that. But the size that Scott's talking about, it could make sense. So my thinking would be that you appoint a primary and an alternate, and then you guys can switch. as needed, so that if, Bert, you end up if you're not able to make a meeting, John can step in and fill that gap, or that you end up just sort of passing the baton at some point. So I'm planning on had we had our city council meeting this month, we would have appointed a primary member and an alternate, and the alternate is planning to attend, the meetings and participate in the community advisory meetings. The main work up front, is, as the chair mentioned, is be working with me to review proposals, participate in an interview, and make a recommendation to city council to selecting a consultant, and establishing a committee. Both the criteria, the way our rules are written in city council, is this would be what I would call an ad hoc committee. So it's specific to a task. It's not a standing committee that will last until the end of time. It has a specific task. It's only there it'll last a couple of years, honestly. But this person would also help create that criteria, much like we did when we selected, the city selected many of you to be on the planning commission. City council approves criteria. The selection committee does an application process, reviews those applications, conducts interviews, and then makes a recommendation on a sort of ranked list of members. And then that would be adopted by city council. And then that group, so there's those sort of preliminary tasks. And then, if there's a break, John, that might be that time where someone steps in then and starts serving on that advisory committee. And right now we're scoping about 10 meetings that will probably happen once a month, once every 2 months. It'll be at certain milestones throughout the comprehensive plan process. So there's sort of the gearing up, which is getting the consultant, getting the advisory committee in place. And then there's like getting on the train and going forward on plan and participating in that. So
Layla, can you tell us about the RFP process and what the timeline for that looks like, so that we have kind of an idea about when the real work is, I call it the real work.
I've been working so hard on it already. Well, my hope and dream and wish is to get this comp plan, so the RFP out in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to allow, because we're going to enter into the holiday season, probably till January, and allow 90 days for folks to review and respond, because we are doing a full kind of formal process. So we're asking a lot of the consultant team, and having been a consultant, I appreciate having more than a couple of weeks to respond to something like this. So given the timing of when the RFP will drop, I'm anticipating mid to late January for us to get those responses back. And then it would take, there'll be a whole schedule outlined in the RFP, but I imagine it'll take a week or two for staff and the committee. So the committee will be the selection committee for the RFP, which will likely be, which will be myself, a member of the planning commission, and a member of city council, and likely, I think that's it. And then we would review those RFPs, we would conduct interviews. And so we're likely to get a consultant on board. I always like to under promise so I can hopefully over provide in the end, but early March would be the target to get someone on board. And that's, to me, a realistic time frame for a scope and project this big. It's big. So that's the current hope. And if I get it out sooner, then that will shift by a few weeks, but I'll be sure to send a copy of the RFP out to the planning commission once it gets dropped.
Okay. And do you anticipate that the consultant would be involved in, I'm going to call it hiring for no other better word, appointing the members of the ad hoc committee, or is that something that the city council, you, planning commission, advocate organize?
Yeah, I feel like we're pretty well prepared to figure out the size and makeup of that committee. I think because, largely I have some background in this, and I worry if we wait, then it will take us another several months to kind of go through our process. So my hope is I drop the RFP, I can turn my attention and work with the committee to get the committee sorted, and ideally have the committee already set in place. They won't have their first meeting until after we get through. I think I have it scoped to have the first meeting be a review of the community engagement plan that the consultant will develop. So I'd like to have the committee, I'd like to do that work and work with the counselor and the commissioner on establishing that committee and going through that whole process before or during kind of this whole selection process so that we can just hit the ground running. It isn't to say that a consultant wouldn't have some good input on that, but I just fear if we wait too long, and our committee selection process is not, it's not a quick process for good reason. But I just want to acknowledge that I think makes the most sense to me.
Okay.
I think that's a great idea, Layla. I think but I'm helping Seaside with their comp plan right now, and they were able to get their committee together after the project was kicked off. But it would have been nice to have had that done before the project was kicked off, because it did delay that first committee meeting probably about a month to organize.
Oh, okay.
How you do the selection, who gets to appoint. Is there a process where you apply to be on the committee? So it's great. I would think it's great you figure out ahead of time. It'll put you ahead of the game a little.
Okay.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay. So how does my recommendation sit with the rest of the commission and actually with the people I'm recommending?
I want to hear them say we're willing to serve.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I appreciate that.
Well, I'm willing to serve. I would make one request that it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bert, it sounds like you're really going to be heavy into the process of selecting a consultant, and that, if I understood Karen correctly, that's sort of your plan. If you want me to jump in after that and run with the committee, I would like to be at least a participant in the process of selecting the committee.
Yeah, it's unclear to me, Layla, when do you anticipate selecting, or would if we're splitting it, would you want me to help develop the criteria for the committee? Is that what it would be? Maybe.
Yeah, and honestly, it's up to really you to decide how much you want to take on. I think I only need one person to assist with both the RFP and the committee selection process. I'd like it to be the same person that develops the criteria for the committee that helps select the committee members, because shifting kind of midway, it's just more efficient. Because the person who's helped create the criteria has sort of sat through, has worked with the group of folks that's going to be doing the recommendations. Ultimately, City Council decides on the slate. But to me, I think I would have some pause about splitting the duties of creating criteria and then selecting the committee selection committee. So kind of, yeah. So it's really up to you to decide what you want to do.
Okay, the next question is it going to be more effective for you just to have one person all the way through, and or if I helped with just the RFP and consultant selection and John took everything else, does that work for you?
If that's what the commission decides to do, then yeah, I can make that work.
Okay. I think what Layla's saying, she'd rather just have one person all the way through. So
there's just having that continuity.
All right,
makes a difference.
Well, John, I'll step back.
Bert, if you're volunteering, go ahead.
I was stepping back and throwing the ball to you. And, in terms of the RFP, I do have some experience with that and suggestions. I think crafting the RFP is really probably the first step into drafting the comprehensive plan, right? Because the questions that you ask in that are going to be directly tied to the capabilities and skill set of the consultant that's going to be able to respond to it. So,
and sorry, Bert, I do want to clarify that it would be selecting the consultant. I'm actually going to do the RFP. So if that changes your mind or anything. So.
All right. I guess the question is, Layla, is in terms of crafting the RFP, you're going to take that. Would there be any input by the commissioner, the city council on that crafting of the RFP? You're not anticipating that?
No.
All right. Okay. Good enough.
I've never done that in my experience, so be really new to me.
All right, good enough.
And I feel capable enough, just given my education and background and 20 years of experience in planning, that I can do a good RFP. But what I do want is a member of the commission and the planning and the city council to review the proposals and evaluate the experience and, help with that part of the decision making. RFP is just sort of, here's kind of what we think we need, and then we as a team evaluate those too. And so that's where having someone who has some subject matter or at least a strong interest in comprehensive planning gets to really have a very strong role in selecting of the consultant. It's more democratic in that way. But no, I've never had a planning commissioner or council write an RFP.
Well, certainly wouldn't want to write it, would probably want to make sure the conceptual approach was fundamentally aligned with the commission's thought. John, I'm going to step back and let you grab the reins because that seems to be most effective and efficient to have one person carry all the way through. And, I'm happy to be an alternate in case you can't make a meeting or something like that.
Can I ask a quick question? It's probably for you, Layla, but am I available? Will I be able to talk to Bert about this issue without running afoul of any of the conflict of interest issues?
Yeah, I think it's okay to have conversations with Bert. I would just be mindful of, extending those beyond that. And just, I think talking about, comp plans generally is one thing. I think you're okay when it starts getting into that territory, but I think one-on-one conversation would be perfectly fine.
And I'd like to reiterate, please, you write the RFP. I don't want to be, I'll be glad to review it, as I'm sure we all will or would, but I don't want to be, that is not my forte.
Okay. Any conversation from the other commissioners on, I just want to make sure that we have, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, this is more of a question. I'm sorry, I should probably know this already, but the committee that you're talking about appointing is the committee that is going to be drafting the comprehensive plan. That's correct? And then
No.
Do they take it to, I'm still unclear of our role in this. Do they take it to us to approve and then to the city council?
Yeah.
I don't know this whole overarching process.
Sure. No, that's a great question, a good clarification. So this advisory group, for lack of a better name, let's call them the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee. And so staff will include myself and the consultant team. We will be, if you think of like the umbrella of community outreach, right? We'll be doing large scale community engagement through surveys and going to the market and, a lot of the stuff that Brett Estes talked about last week.
Mhm.
So we'll be getting a lot of input. The consultant team will then be distilling that information into, broadly speaking, goals and objectives. We will then run that by the advisory committee first and say, here's actually a simpler version of this is the community engagement plan. Like, my thought is that the consultant will help draft a community engagement plan. We take that to the advisory committee, and the advisory committee gives feedback. We adjust that. The same would be true for goals, objectives, and policies in the comp plan. We take it to them first. They provide feedback. We make any changes to that based on their feedback. Then we bring it to the planning commission. The planning commission then reviews, deliberates, and ultimately makes a recommendation to the city council. So if we're talking about, goals, all the goals, you guys are the ones that actually review those goals once they've been through kind of large scale community involvement. You think of it as a sieve, right? It goes from large scale to the advisory committee. It goes to the planning commission. The planning commission needs to make a recommendation. So there may be iterations that we have to go through. We might have to have multiple hearings with you guys on the recommendations. We get those to a point where the planning commission's like stamp of approval. That then goes to the city council, and the city council holds a public hearing. And again, maybe multiple public hearings. And there may be changes at that point. And until such time that the city council is solid, then they adopt. And then that's when it actually becomes our plan. So it just sort of starts big picture, narrows down. Having the advisory group just gives us one other opportunity to engage, albeit with a smaller group, but this group will have kind of a higher level of capacity in the sense that we'll be providing them, more than the general public at large, right? You start to get a committee that's very familiar then with comprehensive planning. It builds capacity too within your community. So these 12 folks will have a lot more capacity than before. So just in terms of a robust community process, and I think this community would demand one, that having that advisory group review that before it comes to you, but ultimately y'all are the decision maker and that you have to make the recommendation. So it has to be done to your level of satisfaction. And then that goes to the city council. But by having the advisory group, I think it provides you as a decision-making body with additional community support and feedback and buy-in by having an advisory group. I consternated about it for about 5 minutes and then was like, we have to do this. Like, it just, any good plan I've ever done, and they're all good, had an advisory group. It adds time, but I think it's useful. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you for that explanation. I'm sorry I needed it. I'm also wondering, though, if this can be accomplished in one person's lifetime, because it sounds you've been through it before, so I know that's possible. Wow.
That was my only job then, so
okay.
Doing it on top of being a city manager kind of going to be interesting. But that's what we're going to hire, hopefully a good consultant team, and I'll hope to have a lot of energy and probably more white hair at the end of this.
Okay, just the last thing is, it doesn't go through the process piecemeal, right? You're not like, here's goal one, and you bring that to the committee, the commission, city council, go back. We're going to see a package, ideally. I know it can go up and down and revisions and all that, but it's not coming to us sequentially.
Yeah, that's correct. And our hope is, so I've done it both ways, where we had the full draft plan and then we brought that. I've done it where we did it in groups. So we had kind of all the urban related goals. We went through the process with that. So there's, but not one goal at a time, because that would take forever. So we'll work with our consultant team to see what's the most efficient. Because it may be that, let's say we group all the natural resource stuff into one grouping and kind of go through the process that way. But that'll be part of what I'll be looking for when we interview and engage with consultants is what is the most efficient way for us to take it through. Because an entire plan with all, I think we're subject to 16 of the statewide goals of the 19. It's a lot to chew on. So we'll figure out what to do, but no, it won't be one goal at a time. The TSP is an exception to that because the TSP is a whole separate plan, and then we're just updating the policies of that goal 12. So actually, we'll only have to do 15 because we'll be done with 12.
If I can jump in just to add about the committee, I think the steering committee is really a valuable thing. I always look at them as the sounding board to the project and also kind of as our test group before we go to the public. So you'll want to be able to, if you're going to do a public meeting, maybe you want to run your public meeting, your event through that steering committee ahead of time and get some advice on how you could change things before you get live in front of the public. So I brought up a little list of kind of responsibilities generally, but it's things like reviewing and commenting on the work projects, whether that's the public involvement plan or the draft goals and policies or whatever that product may be. One of the big things the committee does is they really guide the public outreach engagement efforts for comprehensive plans. So that committee will really be involved in the public outreach efforts and act as liaisons to their groups, their interest groups, or whatever they represent. You know, that's the people that they want to get involved, and they speak to their groups. We'll ask them to host public events potentially. We want them to encourage others in the community to participate. And then finally, when you get to adoption of the plan, you want that committee to be in those meetings as a championship recommending adoption, you know, and being there saying, hey, this is a good plan. We worked on it. So there's a lot of good reasons to have a committee. And I think that it's going to be a very useful thing when you're going to do your comp plan update. So hopefully I didn't beat a dead horse there, but.
No, I think that all sounds great. And I'm happy to have John be the one doing all that. So I support his nomination.
Okay, Phil? Have any questions or Phil's an okay? How about you, Lee?
No, I have no questions.
Okay. You have any comments on appointing John?
I'm glad somebody stepped up.
Okay. How about you, Frank? Are you...
No, I appreciate John's efforts and also Bert being the backup.
Okay, great. I really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. And thank you very much, John, for stepping in. It's going to be a lot of time. And I appreciate the fact that you're willing
I have the time
to take that on. That's great. Time and the connections. I think that's going to be really useful. Okay, we're now to the general updates portion of our meeting.
Karen, it looks like December, we're probably going to have a design review. I don't know. Maybe Layla can tell me if I can let the cat out of the bag on what this one is or not.
Of course. Yeah, no, and we're definitely going to have a design review for City Hall. So we actually have our pre-application meeting tomorrow. We're at 100% design development. So we're actually starting into construction documents, I think. So we're trucking. So we're going to staff tomorrow and then anticipate submitting an application fairly shortly thereafter. It will be a complete application too. And then we will be before the Planning Commission on December 11th.
Okay, that's great. And anything happening in November that you're aware of?
Nothing. We don't have anything scheduled right now. So I'm not sure. Are we going over the TSP?
Yeah, that was a question.
Yeah, I wanted to note that. So I think, as all of you know, our city council meeting was canceled this month, and that set us back a month with the adoption of the TSP. And I just didn't feel it was appropriate to start discussing ordinance changes for an ordinance that hadn't received at least a first initial vote from the city council. So I'll be sending out to the Planning Commission updated memorandum that has the ordinance changes. I think we discussed there were some in there like related to sidewalks that were, I think, shouldn't have been in there. So we've cut those. So you'll get a red line strikeout version of the updated code. Ordinance amendments, not code. I'm sorry. So we'll be sending that out to you. So you have another few weeks to spend some time on that. I did get some really good feedback, incorporated everything that I could on that. And then staff actually went through it again with a fine tooth comb and made some changes to some of the standards like block size and things like that. And right of way, the cross sections. I will note though too that the TSP, we also made some of those changes to the cross sections. So for example, one of the notes that was mentioned was that local streets didn't include on-street parking. And so we actually went back and made some surgical amendments to the TSP, nothing substantive. But they do ultimately, when that document's adopted, then we're updating the street standards. So I just wanted it to be accurate. So we went through and did a little fine tune of both the ordinance amendments and made some changes to the TSP to reflect those. So y'all get a copy of that. And my hope is that we can have a good discussion around that in November. And if there are any questions, changes, edits, comments between now and then, I do invite you to please send those to me. It's a lot more effective for staff to get those kind of tough questions in advance so we can respond to them and then have a discussion in November. And if we need to make further changes, we'll come back again in either December or January, depending on how much time the City Hall project takes. It's design review, so it'll be your first design review as a committee. We're going to have such a tight application that I imagine it'll be a very fun discussion. So so we'll have our first chat through the ordinance amendments for the TSP next week or next month.
Okay, and assuming that all the work that you've done is absolutely perfect and up to snuff, there's potentially that we could recommend to City Council to adopt the ordinance changes with respect to the TSP, right?
Yeah.
So
yes.
The sooner we
get ahead of myself, but
sooner we get our reading material, then we can make sure that we get close to.
Yeah, I'll shoot it out either this afternoon or tomorrow. You'll get it. It's done. I just need to finish.
Okay, it would be really nice to have something to hand to the City Council that says, we're done.
Yeah. Done.
Any comments or questions from the commission on anything upcoming, or everybody going to be okay with the next couple of meetings? Go ahead, Bert.
Yeah, I'm a neophyte on the design review process. And so there might be other commissioners also. So if there's any guidance or strategies around it, maybe you could help us with that.
Okay.
Oh, you bet. I will. She's a pro here, but there's actually sections in the ordinance that provide guidance to the Planning Commission on how to evaluate an application. And then there's also in that you can see what's required of the applicant. So I'll send out those code sections. I know, Karen, if you have any words to the wise about we shouldn't be counting toilets inside. Like if there's things like that, you might want to mention to the
the main guidance with design review is we're not approving the building plans. What we're doing is we're looking at how well this particular design fits into the city and the neighborhood that it's sited in. So with respect to anything on the interior, we really only look at it as how it affects the exterior. So windows, doors, lighting, those kind of things. But really what we're looking at is, and this is where we get to be really creative. And to me, it's the best part of being on the Planning Commission is you really get to kind of direct how things look and, for buildings that will be here for another 20 to 50 to 80 years, who knows? Depends on when the tsunami hits us, but sorry. So the main thing is
to 100 years.
yeah, thank you. What we're looking at really is how does this fit into the city's life, into the neighborhood? What kind of impact is it going to have on the properties surrounding it? And what mitigation should we provide, if any, so that it's a pleasant experience for each building? So that's basically it. We're looking at, do they have ADA parking, all of the things that are going to be required to show on the plan. And hopefully they will come with samples of what the materials will look like that they're going to be using, or, color palettes, and it's helpful, to have a really good landscaping plan, because those are all the part of the things that affect how this property will look.
I consider myself artistically challenged, and my wife will tell you that my color palette leaves a lot to be desired. So what kind of detail? I mean, picking colors, we review that.
No.
I mean, I know there's some architects on the commission that we can rely on, but you're not actually asking me to choose
No.
anything like that.
You can recuse yourself.
I would say this: if the plan comes with hot pink gutters and downspouts, we would want to look at that and say, does that fit with the Pacific Northwest style, whatever that is?
Because I can't choose straight colors in my.
And you're welcome to recuse yourself from any discussions on colors. But no, the idea is
there.
Does it fit? That's what we're looking for. Is would you want to live next door to that? And I think, for the most part, most of the builders in the area are really interested, or developers are really interested in buildings that will the citizens will want to be around. So,
and the ordinance does really provide good guidance on what you should be looking for. And that's where the onus is really on the applicant to convey the look, feel, and design of that structure. So my hope is that we're not getting down to paint color, because you like what you see, but it's happened before. For sure. But the guidance should be really helpful in helping you understand, like, here are the things you should be looking at and making sure that we cover. And if the application is done well, which it will be, the narrative will be very responsive to that. So you'll get a copy of the application in addition to the staff recommendation. In this case, it'll be Scott. But I think I should also note, just so folks understand, that city projects are held to the same standard as any other project. And in fact, being project manager for the city, I hold it to even a bit higher standard. So we have to meet every obligation that any private developer would be, and that's the lens in which Scott will be reviewing it, and I will be reviewing it as the city's planning director. Even though I'm the project manager, I will be holding it to that standard if higher.
Bill?
Leila, will we be receiving plans to look at in advance of this presentation?
Probably not, but as soon as the application is submitted, we have, in the spirit of trying to engage more with the community, our website, we actually post those applications now on the website. So you'll see it before the staff report's done. Normally you just get it a week in advance. So actually the architect, I just got some plans today, and they're still fine tuning everything. So it's not ready for release, but as soon as the application is deemed complete, then we will post that on the city's website.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else? Okay, I think that we can adjourn the meeting 40 minutes early, 50 minutes early. Thanks, everybody. See you
All right.
next time, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.